The alien vampire woman was hiding from me. "I don't want to hurt you, human," she said. The transport shuttle Meridian shuddered as it locked onto Research Station Prometheus 7's docking clamp with all the grace of a drunk elephant attempting ballet. Dr. Elias Kane gripped his safety harness and muttered, "Note to self. Next time, spring for the deluxe shuttle service that doesn't sound like it's held together with prayer and duct tape." The airlock cycled with a pneumatic hiss that seemed to echo longer than it should in the station's corridors. Elias stepped through, his boots clanking against the metal decking with sounds that bounced off the walls like lonely ghosts. The first thing that struck him wasn't the silence. He'd expected that from the mission briefing, but the quality of the silence. It felt thick, almost tangible, as if the air itself was holding its breath. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding embarrassingly small in the vast corridor. "Dr. Kane reporting for data recovery duty. Anyone home, or did you all decide to take an impromptu vacation to Zora's lovely radiation-soaked surface?" The station's main corridor stretched ahead, illuminated by the soft blue glow of emergency lighting that cast everything in an underwater pallor. According to his handheld scanner, life support was functioning perfectly. Temperature at a comfortable 21 degrees Celsius, atmospheric composition standard, artificial gravity holding steady at 0.9 g. Everything exactly as it should be for a crew of 37 researchers and support staff. Except for the complete absence of 37 researchers and support staff. Elias consulted his mission tablet, pulling up the station schematic. "All right, Prometheus 7, let's see what secrets you're hiding. And please, for the love of all that's scientific, let them be boring secrets. I'm talking data corruption, equipment failure, maybe a really aggressive case of food poisoning. Nothing that requires me to update my will." He made his way toward the central hub, passing crew quarters with doors standing ajar. Through the gaps, he glimpsed unmade beds, personal items scattered on desks, and in one room, a half-finished chess game with pieces positioned mid-strategy. The White King looked particularly forlorn, trapped in what appeared to be an inevitable checkmate. "Seriously?" Elias paused at the chess game. "You couldn't finish one game before disappearing into the cosmic ether? That's just poor sportsmanship." The mess hall revealed more mysteries. Trays of food sat on tables, some with fork marks still visible in congealed protein paste that had developed a distinctly unappetizing green tinge. Coffee cups held liquid that had long since evolved beyond mere beverage into something approaching sentience. A wall-mounted screen still displayed the daily menu, Tuesday special, synthesized beef stroganoff, now 37% more beef-like. Tuesday. Elias checked his chronometer. That was 6 weeks ago. Either you've all discovered time dilation, or someone forgot to update the menu before vanishing. He poked experimentally at a piece of what might once have been bread. It had achieved a consistency somewhere between rubber and ceramics. On second thought, maybe disappearing was the sensible choice. The central hub housed the station's primary computer core, a humming cylinder of quantum processors that cast prismatic light across the curved walls. Elias activated his portable interface, cables snaking from his equipment to connect with the station's data ports. As the connection established, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows beyond the light. Probably just the surveillance system, he told himself, glancing at the small cameras mounted in the corners. Their indicator lights showed green, active and recording. At least someone's keeping an eye on things. Even if it's just a computer with all the personality of a particularly boring rock. The initial data download revealed normal operational parameters up until 6 weeks and 3 days ago. Then, abruptly, all crew activity logs ceased. No emergency signals, no system failures, no dramatic final transmissions. The crew of Prometheus 7 had simply stopped existing in the station's records, as if they'd collectively decided to step outside reality for a coffee break and forgotten to come back. A soft sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the station, a faint humming that seemed to rise and fall with an almost musical cadence. Elias paused his data analysis, straining to listen. The sound was barely perceptible, riding just at the edge of hearing, like a lullaby sung in a language he'd never learned but somehow recognized. "Well," he said to the empty hub, his voice deliberately cheerful, "at least the station has a nice singing voice. Very soothing. Really sets the mood for a productive day of solving mysterious disappearances and definitely not getting eaten by whatever made an entire crew vanish without a trace." The humming stopped. In the sudden silence, Elias became acutely aware of his own heartbeat, the soft whir of his equipment, and the gentle susurrus of air cycling through the ventilation system. He looked around the hub, noting how the shadows seemed to shift subtly in his peripheral vision, always moving just enough to catch his attention but never quite enough to confirm they'd moved at all. "Right then," he said, fingers dancing across his tablet with perhaps more enthusiasm than necessary. "Let's find out what happened to you people. And let's hope it was something wonderfully mundane, like collective food poisoning from that Tuesday stroganoff." But as he worked, pulling data streams and analyzing system logs, Elias couldn't shake the growing certainty that somewhere in the station's corridors, something was watching him with interest that felt far too personal for comfort. The research lab's main terminal flickered to life as Elias input his authorization codes, revealing a cascade of files labeled with increasingly ominous designations: xenobiological analysis, specimen containment protocols, and his personal favorite, emergency sterilization procedures. He scrolled through the directory with the enthusiasm of someone opening their tax audit results. "Oh good," he muttered, clicking on the first file. "Because nothing says routine data recovery like emergency sterilization procedures. I'm sure that's just standard paperwork for handling particularly aggressive space fungi." The initial reports painted a picture of methodical scientific excitement. 3 months ago, the crew had recovered what they termed biological debris from an asteroid field near Zora's third moon. The debris showed signs of artificial construction, cellular structures too organized to be natural, too complex to be random mutation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the station's xenobiologist, had written extensive notes about the specimen's unprecedented adaptive capabilities. "Adaptive capabilities," Elias read aloud. "That's scientist speak for it does things we really wish it wouldn't. Why can't these things ever adapt to be better at sitting quietly in containment?" As he delved deeper into the files, his tablet screen began flickering intermittently. At first, he attributed it to normal electromagnetic interference from the station's quantum core, but the pattern seemed almost rhythmic: 3 short flickers, followed by 2 long ones, then a pause. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't place what. The specimen logs grew progressively more concerning. Initial tissue samples had demonstrated remarkable regenerative properties, regrowing from microscopic fragments within hours. When subjected to various stimuli, the samples showed responses that suggested not just life, but awareness. Dr. Chen's notes included sketches of cellular structures that looked disturbingly like neural networks, albeit arranged in patterns no terrestrial biology textbook would recognize. A soft thud echoed from somewhere above his head. Elias paused, looking up at the ceiling panels. The sound came again, deliberate, measured, like footsteps in the ventilation system. "Hello, space mice," he called cheerfully. "Having a nice constitutional through the air ducts? Don't mind me, just down here reading about specimens with unprecedented adaptive capabilities. I'm sure there's no connection between you and the mysteriously absent crew." The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, Elias became aware of his tablet screen stabilizing, the rhythmic flickering ceasing entirely. He frowned at the device, tapping its edge experimentally. The screen remained steady, displaying Dr. Chen's increasingly frantic final entries. "Subject X demonstrates problem-solving capabilities beyond initial assessments," he read. "Specimen appears to learn from observation, modifying behavior based on environmental feedback. Request immediate consultation with cognitive specialists." The timestamp showed the entry was made 6 weeks and 4 days ago, 1 day before all records ceased. Elias scrolled to the final entry, finding a video log that made his stomach clench with anticipation he didn't particularly want to feel. Dr. Chen's face appeared on screen, her usually composed features showing signs of strain. Behind her, containment alarms flashed red, and the sound of emergency protocols echoed through the lab speakers. Personal log, Dr. Sarah Chen, Stardate 2387.156. The specimen has evolved beyond our containment parameters. Initial breach occurred at 0347 hours when Subject X demonstrated the ability to manipulate electronic systems through direct bioelectric interface. We've lost primary containment, and the creature is somewhere within the station's infrastructure. The video flickered, and for a moment, Elias thought he glimpsed something moving behind Dr. Chen, a shadow that seemed too purposeful to be a trick of the lighting. The fascinating aspect, Chen continued, her scientific curiosity apparently undiminished by impending disaster, is that the specimen shows no overtly hostile behavior. It seems more curious, as if it's studying us as intensively as we've been studying it. Though I should note that 3 crew members have reported feeling unusually fatigued after working in sections where the creature was detected. A sound off camera made Chen turn her head sharply. When she looked back at the recording device, her expression had changed from scientific fascination to something approaching awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and the log ended abruptly. Elias stared at the blank screen for several long moments. "Beautiful," he repeated. "Right. Because that's exactly what you want to hear about the thing that made your entire crew disappear. Don't worry, officer. The serial killer was quite attractive." His tablet chimed softly, indicating an incoming data packet from the station's environmental sensors. The reading showed minor fluctuations in electromagnetic fields throughout the station. Nothing dangerous, but consistent with the presence of something generating low-level bioelectric activity. The patterns were too organized to be random system noise, too widespread to be equipment malfunction. As if responding to his analysis, the lights in the lab dimmed momentarily, then returned to full brightness. The gesture felt almost conversational, like someone nodding in acknowledgement. "Oh, wonderful," Elias said, backing up his data with perhaps more haste than strictly necessary. "We've moved from mysterious disappearances to interactive light shows. Next you'll probably start rearranging the furniture to spell out 'welcome' in the universal language of interior design." A soft clang echoed from the corridor outside, the sound of something metallic being deliberately placed against the floor. Then another clang, closer to the lab entrance. And another. Elias counted 7 distinct sounds, evenly spaced, approaching the lab with the measured pace of someone, or something, taking a casual stroll. The sounds stopped directly outside the lab door. "You know," he said conversationally to the door, "most people knock first. It's considered polite in most civilized societies. Though I suppose if you've been living in the air ducts for 6 weeks, etiquette might not be your top priority." The door remained closed, but his tablet screen flickered once, that same rhythmic pattern as before. 3 short, 2 long, pause. 3 short, 2 long, pause. And then Elias remembered what the pattern reminded him of: Morse code. The letter V, followed by the letter I. Over and over. 6. 6. 6. As in 6. Or perhaps, he realized with growing unease, a Roman numeral counting down. The darkness within the maintenance shaft felt different from the sterile emptiness of the station corridors. Here, Lyra had carved out something resembling existence, threading through conduits and crawlspaces with the fluid grace her people had evolved for navigating the crystalline caves of her homeworld. That world was gone now, consumed by the stellar collapse that had forced her into the desperate hibernation that brought her here. "Another day in paradise," she whispered to herself, borrowing the human phrase she'd learned from intercepting crew communications during her first weeks of hiding. The irony wasn't lost on her. Paradise was supposed to be a place of eternal rest, and she'd certainly had enough of that during her decades-long sleep. Through a ventilation grate, she watched the human scientist work at his tablet. Dr. Elias Kane, according to the personnel files she'd accessed through the station's network during a moment of desperate hunger-driven boldness. He possessed an admirable dedication to terrible jokes, she'd noticed, muttering commentary that would have made her laugh if laughter didn't risk revealing her position. The hunger gnawed at her constantly now, a hollow ache that had grown from manageable discomfort to genuine distress over the past month. Her people's physiology required specific nutrients found in the bioelectric fields of sentient beings. Not their life force exactly, but something more complex, more intimate. The translation protocols in her neural implant rendered it crudely as feeding, though the process was far more nuanced than mere consumption. She remembered the first time it had happened, 3 weeks after her awakening in the research lab. Dr. Chen had been working late, alone, focused intently on analyzing tissue samples. Lyra had intended only to observe, to learn more about these curious beings who had found her drifting in the void. But the hunger had overwhelmed her caution, and she'd reached out through the station's electrical systems, drawing just enough to sustain herself. Chen had slumped forward, unconscious but unharmed, and Lyra had fled in horror at her own loss of control. The next morning, Chen had reported feeling unusually tired, and complained of strange dreams filled with starlight and singing crystals. "Sorry about that," Lyra murmured now, adjusting her position in the shaft as Elias moved to a different console. "I really was trying to be polite about the whole invasive feeding thing." Her enhanced hearing picked up his muttered commentary about Morse code and Roman numerals. Clever. She'd been unconsciously tapping against the conduit walls in the rhythm of her homeworld ceremonial chants, not realizing the pattern would translate into human communication systems. Her people's mathematics were base 6, which probably explained his confusion about the counting. The real problem was that her mere presence was beginning to destabilize the station's quantum processors. Her species generated a natural bioelectric field that interfered with certain types of artificial intelligence, an evolutionary adaptation from their symbiotic relationship with their world's crystalline neural networks. Unfortunately, the same field that had allowed her people to interface seamlessly with their technology was playing havoc with human systems. She watched Elias frown at his flickering tablet and felt a pang of guilt. The electromagnetic fluctuations weren't intentional, but they were getting worse as her hunger increased. Soon, the interference would cascade through the station's primary systems, potentially leading to life support failure. "Well, that's just perfect," she whispered. "Survive the death of an entire star system only to accidentally murder the first interesting human I've met in decades through chronic power grid problems." Through the grate, she observed Elias backing up his data with increasing urgency. His survival instincts were excellent, even if his taste in humor needed work. The way he'd cataloged the crew's disappearance showed a methodical mind that reminded her of her own people's approach to scientific problems. Observe, hypothesize, test, repeat. Of course, her people had also possessed the wisdom to avoid poking mysterious specimens with sticks, but every species had its blind spots. The hunger flared again, stronger this time, and she felt her control wavering. The lights in the lab dimmed as her bioelectric field pulsed involuntarily. She pressed her palms against the cool metal of the conduit, using the pain to focus her thoughts and rein in the electromagnetic storm building within her nervous system. Below, Elias made another joke about furniture arrangement, and despite everything, she found herself smiling. His ability to maintain humor in the face of obvious danger was either admirable courage or spectacular stupidity. Possibly both. The station's environmental sensors would be detecting her presence now, she realized. The bioelectric readings would be impossible to miss for anyone with Elias's apparent intelligence. He'd piece together the pattern soon enough. The missing crew, the electromagnetic anomalies, the creature that Dr. Chan had called beautiful in her final log. Lyra closed her eyes, remembering that moment. She'd been hiding in the lab service alcove when Chen discovered her, emerging from the shadows with her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. The terror in Chen's eyes had lasted only seconds before being replaced by wonder, then scientific fascination. "You're not just a specimen," Chen had whispered. "You're a person." It had been the first time in decades that someone had looked at her and seen an individual rather than a curiosity or a threat. The memory still brought warmth to the cold spaces where her heart should have been. But Chen was gone now, along with the rest of the crew. Not dead, Lyra could have sensed that much through the station's neural network, but gone somewhere beyond her ability to track. The quarantine protocols had activated 6 weeks ago, sealing sections of the station and relocating personnel to emergency shelters on Zora's moons. They'd left her alone with her hunger and her guilt, rattling around the empty corridors like a ghost haunting a tomb of her own making. Now this human had arrived, and she faced the same impossible choice: reveal herself and risk losing control again, or hide until the cascading system failures killed them both. "Decisions, decisions," she murmured, watching Elias count the rhythmic sounds she'd made while lost in memory. "Do I introduce myself properly this time, or continue my promising career as the galaxy's most antisocial houseguest?" The hunger pulsed again, and the lights flickered in response. Soon, the choice would be made for her. Elias traced the electromagnetic readings on his tablet, following the anomalous signatures like breadcrumbs through the station's deck plans. The patterns led him inexorably toward the sealed biolab, the one place he'd been actively avoiding since discovering Dr. Chen's final log entry. His grandmother had always said curiosity killed the cat, though she'd usually added that satisfaction brought it back. He sincerely hoped the resurrection clause was included in his current situation. "Right then," he muttered, checking his toolkit for anything that might pass as a weapon. Plasma cutter, magnetic resonance scanner, Emergency rations that could probably double as projectiles if thrown hard enough. I'm basically a one-man army, assuming the enemy is susceptible to precise cuts, detailed analysis, and nutrition-based assault. The corridor leading to the biolab felt different from the rest of the station. The air seemed thicker, charged with potential energy that made the hair on his arms stand up. His tablet screen flickered more frequently here, displaying random data bursts that resolved into fragments of files he hadn't accessed. Crew medical records, atmospheric readings from the asteroid field, even someone's personal recipe for Zoran moonshine that apparently involved fermented algae and questionable judgment. As he approached the lab's entrance, the station's artificial gravity hiccuped. For a moment, Elias felt himself become slightly lighter, his feet barely maintaining contact with the deck plating. Then the effect reversed, pressing him down with nearly double normal weight before settling back to standard. "Oh, fantastic," he said, gripping the corridor handrail as another gravity fluctuation sent him swaying. "Now we're playing with fundamental forces. Next you'll probably start experimenting with time dilation, and I'll age backwards into a confused teenager with acne problems." The biolab's door stood slightly ajar, emergency lighting casting red warning strobes across the threshold. Through the gap, he could see overturned furniture, scattered research equipment, and what appeared to be the remnants of a hastily abandoned meal. A coffee cup lay on its side, its contents long since evaporated, leaving only a brown stain that looked vaguely accusatory. Elias pressed his palm against the door's manual release, and it slid open with a grinding sound that suggested the mechanisms were struggling against some form of interference. Inside, the lab's main containment unit stood empty, its transparent aluminum walls scarred with what looked like electrical burn patterns radiating outward from the center. "Subject X," he read from a placard mounted beside the containment unit. "Current status: at large and presumably having philosophical discussions about the nature of existence." Well, that's reassuring. His scanner detected elevated electromagnetic activity throughout the lab, concentrated around the central workstation where Dr. Chan had made her final recordings. As he approached, the equipment began responding to his presence. Screens activating without input, diagnostic programs running unprompted, and a spectrographic analyzer that started humming what sounded suspiciously like a waltz. "I appreciate the musical accompaniment," Elias said to the apparently sentient laboratory equipment, "but unless you're planning to break into a full Broadway number, could we maybe focus on not having a catastrophic system failure?" The lights dimmed in response, then brightened, then began cycling through a sequence that almost looked like laughter. A moment later, the station's public address system crackled to life. "Attention! Artificial gravity will be offline for routine maintenance in T-. Error. Recalibrating. T- cake." Elias stared at the nearest speaker. Did the computer just announce routine maintenance at T- cake? Because if so, I have questions about both the timing and the unit of measurement. The gravity fluctuated again, this time sending his toolkit floating in lazy spirals around the lab. He grabbed for his plasma cutter as it drifted past, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity while essentially swimming through the air. The experience reminded him of his academy training in zero-G environments, except with significantly more existential dread and mysterious electromagnetic phenomena. A soft thud echoed from the ventilation system directly above his head, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving through the ductwork with purposeful intent. The gravity stabilized just as his feet touched the deck again, leaving him in an undignified crouch with his arms spread for balance. "You know," he called upward, "if you're going to skulk around in the air conditioning, at least have the courtesy to explain the gravity situation. Are we dealing with quantum field fluctuations, localized space-time distortions, or just really aggressive maintenance protocols?" The movement in the ducts stopped. For several heartbeats, the only sound was the hum of laboratory equipment and the distant whisper of air circulation. Then, barely audible, came a voice that sounded like wind chimes made of starlight. "The field interactions are unintentional. Your quantum processors are incompatible with my nervous system." Elias froze, his plasma cutter halfway to his belt. The voice was definitely female, with an accent he couldn't place and a quality that seemed to resonate in harmonics his ears weren't quite designed to hear. More importantly, it was coming from directly above his head. "Well," he said carefully, "that's the most polite explanation for catastrophic system failure I've ever heard. Thank you for the clarification." Mysterious voice in the ceiling. I don't suppose you'd be interested in coming down here for a proper conversation? I promise to keep the panic to a minimum. A laugh drifted down from the ventilation grate, genuine amusement that transformed the eerie harmonics into something almost musical. You make jokes when you are afraid. This is an interesting adaptation. It's either jokes or screaming, Elias replied, slowly straightening up. And screaming tends to hurt my throat after a while. Plus, it's terribly undignified for a scientist. We're supposed to observe phenomena calmly and rationally, even when those phenomena involve talking to entities hiding in air ducts. The lights flickered again, but this time the pattern seemed more controlled, almost conversational. Through the grate above, he caught a glimpse of movement, something pale that reflected the emergency lighting like polished marble. You are not like the others, the voice said, softer now. They feared what they could not understand. But you make jokes about T- cake. To be fair, Elias said, T- cake is objectively hilarious. Though I'm still not clear on whether that represents a time measurement or some sort of dessert-based emergency protocol. Another laugh, closer this time. The ventilation grate shifted slightly, as if something were preparing to emerge. I believe, the voice said with careful precision, that the correct term would be system malfunction caused by incompatible bioelectric fields interfering with quantum processing matrices. But T- cake has a certain charm to it. The emergency klaxons began wailing at precisely the moment Elias was starting to feel comfortable with his ceiling-dwelling conversational partner. Red warning lights bathed the biolab in crimson urgency while automated voices announced, "Coolant leak detected in Section 7." With a sort of mechanical panic that suggested the situation had moved beyond routine maintenance. Oh, brilliant timing, Elias muttered, checking his scanner as toxic vapor warnings cascaded across the display. Just when we were getting to know each other, the station decides to start bleeding industrial coolant. It's like the universe has a personal vendetta against meaningful conversations. Above him, the ventilation grate rattled as something moved with sudden urgency. The voice from the ceiling carried a note of genuine concern that somehow made the klaxons seem less ominous. The leak is in your section. The vapor will reach lethal concentrations in approximately 4 minutes. Elias pulled up the station's environmental controls on his tablet, scrolling through emergency protocols with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent too many years dealing with malfunctioning equipment. The coolant system showed multiple cascade failures, with safety interlocks disabled and containment barriers offline. According to the readouts, someone, or something, would need to manually reroute the flow from the primary environmental control station. Right, well, this is inconvenient, he said, already moving toward the lab's exit. I don't suppose you know anything about emergency coolant systems? Because my expertise tends toward data recovery and making inappropriate jokes during crisis situations. The response came not as words but as action. Every screen in the biolab flickered to life simultaneously, displaying environmental schematics with startling clarity. System pathways highlighted in blue showed the coolant leak source, while green indicators marked the manual override controls. It was like having a very knowledgeable and slightly mysterious technical support specialist who happened to live in the air conditioning. That's actually extremely helpful, Elias said, watching as the displays updated in real time to show his optimal route through the station. Though I have to ask, are you controlling these systems directly, or did you just have a very productive conversation with the computer? Both, came the reply, tinged with what might have been embarrassment. Your artificial intelligence is quite chatty once you learn to speak its language. It has been lonely since the crew left. Elias made his way through corridors that were rapidly filling with a distinctly unpleasant chemical smell, following the highlighted path on every screen he passed. The station's AI seemed to have developed a helpful obsession with his safety, automatically opening doors before he reached them and adjusting lighting to illuminate potential hazards. I'm starting to feel like I have a very attentive electronic butler, he called out, knowing his voice would carry through the station's audio pickups. Should I be tipping the computer for exceptional service? It prefers compliments about its processing efficiency, the voice replied, now coming from speakers throughout the corridor. Also, it enjoys your jokes, though it does not understand why you reference cake in emergency situations. The environmental control station occupied a cramped chamber deep in the station's core, surrounded by humming machinery that regulated everything from atmospheric composition to artificial gravity. Elias squeezed through the narrow accessway, his toolkit clanking against pipes and conduits as he maneuvered toward the manual override panel. The coolant leak indicators were flashing angry red, showing toxic concentrations building throughout Section 7. His tablet calculated that he had roughly 90 seconds before the vapor reached lethal levels, assuming he could hold his breath for the return journey. This would be an excellent time for any miraculous technical assistance you might have available, he said, connecting his emergency bypass tools to the override panel. I'm reasonably good at following instructions, but I'm significantly better at not dying from chemical poisoning. The response was immediate and extraordinary. Every control surface in the chamber began operating autonomously, valves cycling in precise sequence, pressure readings adjusting with mathematical precision, and coolant flow rerouting through backup systems he hadn't even known existed. It was like watching a master pianist perform, except the piano was an environmental control system and the music was the sound of not dying horribly. "How are you doing this?" he asked, watching in fascination as the toxic vapor readings dropped to safe levels. "Are you interfacing directly with the quantum processors?" "It is complicated," the voice replied, and for the first time, he detected genuine vulnerability in the harmonics. "My people evolved to commune with crystalline neural networks. Your computer systems are crude by comparison, but they respond to bioelectric manipulation if approached with sufficient care." Elias leaned against the control panel, suddenly aware of how close he'd come to a very unpleasant death. The station around him hummed with renewed efficiency, as if some fundamental tension in its systems had been resolved. His tablet showed all environmental readings returning to normal parameters. "So you're essentially a living computer interface," he said. "That's actually rather brilliant. Though I imagine it comes with some interesting side effects, like accidentally making gravity hiccup and teaching the AI to appreciate humor." "The gravity fluctuations are involuntary," the voice admitted. "I have been trying to minimize the electromagnetic interference, but the hunger makes it difficult to maintain control." The word hunger hung in the air between them like a confession. Elias felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Dr. Chen's reports of crew members feeling fatigued, the way the voice seemed to resonate with harmonics that touched something deeper than hearing, the careful way she'd avoided direct contact while still saving his life. "Hunger," he repeated carefully. "I'm guessing we're not talking about a craving for synthesized stroganoff." "No," came the reply, so quietly he had to strain to hear it. "Something more essential. I do not wish to be what I am, Dr. Kane, but I am finding it increasingly difficult to be anything else." The admission carried such profound loneliness that Elias felt his scientific curiosity warring with something deeper, an unexpected urge to offer comfort to a being he'd never seen, whose very nature remained a mystery. "Well," he said finally, "whatever you are, you just saved my life. That counts for something in my book. Even if you do have questionable taste in hiding spots." A sound drifted through the speakers that might have been laughter or might have been crying. "Your book," the voice said, "must be quite interesting reading." The observation deck stretched before them like a cathedral made of stars, its floor-to-ceiling viewports framing Zora's turbulent atmosphere in shades of amber and gold. Elias had suggested meeting here after the coolant crisis, reasoning that if he was going to have a potentially life-altering conversation with a mysterious alien entity, he might as well do it somewhere with a decent view. "You know," he said, adjusting the final connections on the communication array he'd been repairing, "most people would consider mysterious voice from the ceiling to be the end of a relationship, not the beginning. But then again, I've never been accused of being most people." The shadows near the far wall shifted, and she emerged with a grace that made his breath catch in his throat. Lyra, she'd told him her name while he worked, the syllables carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones, moved like liquid starlight, her pale skin catching Zora's reflected glow. Her ears swept back in elegant points that spoke of evolutionary adaptations he could only guess at, and her eyes held depths that reminded him of the space between stars. "I appreciate your willingness to overlook unconventional introductions," she said, maintaining careful distance between them. "Though I should warn you that mysterious voice from the ceiling may have been the safer option." Elias looked up from his work, noting how she stood poised as if ready to flee at the first sign of threat. The scientist in him catalogued details. The way her fingers showed faint traceries of what might be bioelectric pathways, the subtle luminescence that seemed to emanate from her skin, the careful control evident in every movement. "Let me guess," he said, returning to the communication array with deliberate casualness. You're about to explain that you're some sort of energy-feeding alien vampire who accidentally made an entire research crew disappear, and now you're torn between your predatory nature and your newfound appreciation for terrible human humor. Lyra blinked, an expression of surprise crossing her features. That is remarkably accurate. Are all human scientists this perceptive, or do you simply have experience with energy-feeding alien vampires? Educated guesswork, Elias replied, grinning as he calibrated the array's quantum resonance frequency. Plus, I've read enough xenobiology reports to recognize the signs. Crew members reporting fatigue, electromagnetic interference, and something beautiful hiding in the station's infrastructure. The pieces weren't exactly subtle once I stopped panicking about the mysterious disappearances. You are not afraid, she observed, moving slightly closer. Dr. Chen was afraid at first. The others, they never had the chance to move beyond fear. Elias paused in his work, considering her words. Should I be afraid? Because honestly, the past few hours have been the most interesting I've had in months. Sure, there was the near-death experience with the coolant leak, and the gravity-defying furniture was a bit disconcerting, but you saved my life. Twice, if we're counting the time you prevented me from walking into that electrical feedback loop. I fed from them, Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying centuries of guilt. Not intentionally at first, but when the hunger grew stronger. I could not always control myself. They became weak, disoriented. The crew evacuated them to the medical facilities on Zora 3 before the quarantine protocols activated. So they're alive, Elias said, relief evident in his voice. That's excellent news. I was starting to develop some very dark theories about their fate involving digestive processes and creative disposal methods. Despite everything, Lyra laughed, a sound like wind chimes singing in harmony with distant music. Your species has a fascinating relationship with mortality. You make jokes about death while standing in the presence of something that could drain your life force through casual contact. Well, when you put it like that, it does sound rather foolish, Elias admitted, activating the communication array's final diagnostic sequence. But I've spent my career studying the unknown, and you're easily the most remarkable discovery I've ever encountered. Besides, you've had numerous opportunities to drain my life force, and instead you've been helping me repair station systems and preventing me from accidentally poisoning myself. The array hummed to life, its quantum transmitters establishing contact with the research stations orbiting Zora's moons. Within moments, Elias received confirmation that the evacuated crew was safe and recovering at the medical facility on Zora 3. There, he said, leaning back in satisfaction. Crisis officially resolved, missing persons located, and station systems restored to nominal function. I'd say that counts as a successful mission, even if it didn't go quite as planned. Lyra moved to stand beside him at the viewport, careful to maintain a few feet of distance. And now, your superiors will want detailed reports about what happened here. About what I am. Elias considered this, watching Zora's storm swirl in patterns that reminded him of her luminescent skin. Well, that depends. Do you want to be a specimen in someone's lab, or would you prefer to be a consultant on xenobiological research? Because I have some influence with the review board, and I suspect they'd be very interested in someone with your unique abilities. You would vouch for me? She asked, surprise evident in her voice. After everything I have told you? Lyra, Elias said, using her name deliberately, you've demonstrated remarkable restraint, saved my life multiple times, and shown more concern for my welfare than most humans I've worked with. Plus, your technical skills are extraordinary, and your sense of humor is developing nicely. I'd be honored to recommend you for a research position. For the first time since emerging from the shadows, Lyra smiled, an expression that transformed her alien features into something radiant and hopeful. I have spent so long hiding, so long afraid of what I might do to others. But with you, I do not feel like a monster. I feel like someone who might contribute something meaningful to the universe. Elias grinned, already imagining the bureaucratic headaches involved in processing an alien refugee application. Trust me, after the paperwork involved in getting you official status, feeding on bioelectric fields will seem like the easy part. But I think it's worth the effort. The universe is a big place, and it's better when we explore it together. As they stood watching the stars wheel overhead, Elias reflected on how thoroughly his quiet data recovery mission had transformed into something extraordinary. He'd come to Prometheus, 7 expecting routine work and mild boredom. Instead, he'd found first contact, genuine friendship, and a future full of possibilities he'd never imagined. "So," Lyra said, her voice carrying newfound confidence, "where do we begin?" Elias pulled up the research proposal forms on his tablet, already composing introduction letters in his head. "Well, first we need to work on your official biography. Energy-feeding alien vampire might need some creative rephrasing for the personnel department." Her laughter filled the observation deck, harmonizing with the hum of restored systems and the promise of adventures yet to come. The end.